Welcome to the Upper Room at St Clement's Church, Manchester. Join us as we discuss the Bible, theology and life.
Hello and welcome back to the Upper Room. So good to have you with us. Paul Jumpy's with me as usual. Are you okay, Jumpy?
I'm very well, Henry. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm looking forward to the start of the Commonwealth Games today. Very excited by that. And we're launching straight into this, really. But tell us how the Christian life is like Josh Kerr, the new mile world record holder.
It was impressive as Josh Kerr. He just ran and just kept going. And
that's it, isn't it, really? Racing, you just run. It's pretty easy, you know.
Well, that's it. That's exactly what we're supposed to do as a Christian. Run the straight race. Take hold of eternal life, as Paul says in Timothy. And he says something similar here. You know, he puts the Christian life in terms of running a race and uses the imagery of racing to describe how we should live the Christian life. So,
he says in Philippians 3 verse 12, not that I have already obtained it. What's he not already obtained? What's he straining for? Because last week we were talking about we already have righteousness, and so things are, you know, we're right with Christ. Wonderful, and we have his righteousness. But Paul now says there's something he hasn't obtained.
Yes. Verse 11.
Which is?
This is one
the resurrection from the dead.
One of the things I love about the Bible is that the Bible helps us understand the Bible. And so you got a question on one verse, well, you go back to the previous verse, or a verse before that, or you know, it all builds on each other. And so verse 12 builds on verse 11. And what is he not already attained? Well, he is righteous in the sight of God, but he's not already attained his goal. What's his goal? It's being with Christ. He wants to know Christ, great, but he'll only know him fully when he's with him, and he's not with him. He's not been raised from the dead. He's not in the new world. He's not seen him face to face. He's not become the person God made him to be. He's not become completely, even though he is been declared righteous, he's still got a way to go in holiness in this life. He's not got to heaven where he will be made perfect and as he sees Jesus Christ. He doesn't know Jesus Christ like he will know him then. And so that's what he's not got to. He's not been made perfect, as he says. And so there's a race to run. There's a race to run. And
important to remember that we haven't already arrived at that point.
Yeah. And yet, I said in the sermon on Sunday, you know, it's possible for Christians to think they've already arrived. Or at least settle in. And say, I can't be bothered to change, I can't be bothered to grow any further. It's such a danger. But then there's other Christians who think they've arrived because they've reached a certain level of holiness, a certain level of Christian experience, a certain level of knowledge, a certain position in the church, a certain keeping of some rules, and they go, I have made it as a Christian, I am better than other Christians because I am in this position. Very dangerous.
Yeah. I was reflecting on this. I think that's so helpful. I think it's also possible to seek false arrival points in things in this life and be like, I think retirement could be one. Once I've paid the mortgage or I've hit my retirement age and got my pension, then I've arrived and I can really enjoy life. Or seek early retirement. Not that that'll be an option for lots of us, but seek to build up enough resources that I can just stop working or even be like, once you know, I've got out of this phase of life, once I've got the dream home, the family home, then I've arrived, and we can put but Paul's aim is not to find an arrival point in this life. His focus is the finish line is death, but is more than that, is the resurrection of Christ. And how easily do I become, and I guess that was one of your other points, was to fix our eyes on the finish line. But it's so easy, isn't it, to let our focus drift and think of and fix our eyes on other things which we can treat as our arrival point, which actually they're not.
No, you've only arrived when you've broken that tape at the end, when you've, you know, in Josh Kerr's race, when you've finished and got past the finish line and won, broken the record. You're not finished until then. So the same with us, and so we've got to remember we are still mid-race.
If Josh Kerr had sat down and made a sandwich and had a bit of a comfort break during the race, wouldn't have been as good a race.
No way, no, not at all. And he may not have finished. So we've got to remember that.
This seems to take effort, these verses. There's a straining, there's a real exertion.
Yeah, you're right. And this is where sanctification is being talked about rather than justification, because you are righteous. Now go and live it. Go and act like it. Go and it's straining, to keep trusting in Christ, keep obeying Christ, keep running the race. It takes effort to do that. It's not automatic. Run the straight race. Keep going.
So that's the main point. Is there anything you left on the study floor
to do with the race?
I didn't ask you that question last week, so I thought I'd throw it in. No probs if not.
I was fascinated by forgetting what lies behind. So I did talk about this. I think there might even be a question on it.
There is.
But
you talk and then I'll bring the question in.
So I initially I thought forgetting what lies behind is what happened before you become a Christian. Forget your old life. But it's not, because he says, I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind. And so he's talking about the race he's already run. And he forgets the part of the race he's already completed, and says, "I forget that bit. Okay, I've got to a certain point. I've done certain things for the Lord, and He's worked in me in different ways, and I've failed in different ways, and I'm forgetting all that. And that's just right. When you're a runner in a race, you don't think about and spend time looking over your shoulder at where you've been and the runners you've gone past and all the rest of it, because your eyes are on the prize. You're running towards the goal. And Paul says that's the same thing.
All four of our questions are on this topic of forgetting what lies behind.
Okay. It's not just one question. Okay.
Let's squeeze the lemon until all of the juice have come out. So the first question is, I'm going to ask them all because I think they all bring out slightly different things. When Paul says forgetting what lies behind, is he referring to things in our past Christian race or things before the race? I guess before we became Christians. Should we not learn from mistakes?
It is talking about stuff as part of the Christian race.
Okay.
And you should forget about it. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean you shouldn't learn from your mistakes in the Christian life?
We should never give testimonies at the front of church?
So this isn't pre-Christian stuff, definitely not. This is all Christian stuff, because that's what he's been talking about. He's talking about running the race and pressing on in the race and forgetting what's over his shoulder. Does that mean we can't learn? Yes, we can. We can learn from our, past running in the race. Definitely. But we should forget about it. What does that mean? I think it means that shouldn't control our focus. Mm-hmm. So if you've moved forward in certain ways and if you've failed in certain ways, should you learn from those things? Of course you should. Mm-hmm. Definitely. We want to take, our experiences affect us and should do, but they shouldn't control us. The past shouldn't control our present running. Because the danger with that is, one, we won't run as well because we'll think, I'm such a successful Christian, I've done really well to get to this point. Or if we think about our failures, we'll go, oh, I'm just such a useless Christian, and the failures can paralyze our running. No, to run well, you've got to forget. Not let what lies behind control and dominate your thinking. Easier said than done.
Yeah, I think I've spoken to various people, and I felt this myself before. You look back to a time when you felt like you were on fire for God, and God was doing various things, and maybe life doesn't feel like that right now, and over focusing on the nostalgia of the past, you can affect how you feel. How you feel that God feels about you now, and you could say, well, God was really at work then, why is he not at work in my life as much now? And that comparison, I think, can be unhelpful at times, because we can look at the past with rose-tinted spectacles, and I, speaking of my experience, I was really enthusiastic for Christ at university, but I was definitely far less aware of some of the issues in my heart and some of the so maybe there's times where I've not been as exuberant, and there's been harder times in my life, but actually God has used those to make me more aware of my sin and actually draw closer to him and be more reliant on him. Whereas at uni, I basically thought I knew everything and I could conquer the world myself. So I think sometimes the comparison is unhelpful. And what Paul's saying here is, don't draw your hope in God's, don't draw your hope in the past, but keep fixing on the finished work of Christ and his death and resurrection, because that's what's going to get you through. And so often I can put myself at the center of kind of God's plans, but actually keep focusing on the main thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I was just, when you were talking then, it made me think of when I was at Vicar Factory. I did a placement at a church, and the guy who led the worship at the church. So this would be mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, and the guy who led the worship in the service chose the songs, and he chose songs from the late 80s and the early 90s, and
Purify My Heart. That's quite a good one, to be fair.
Well, it's quite a really good song, but he chose a particular era and genre of songs,
Days of Elijah,
and played them on a synthesizer with a synthetic, sound, because obviously that had been the time where he had really been affected, as maybe become a Christian or been affected in his Christian life, and so playing those songs in that kind of way kind of brought that back, and he was like, oh, I remember the time, and so it affected his worship now. Now, can we learn from those things, and should we, can we ever think back and go, oh yeah, that was a great time when the Lord met with me? Yes, but not to the extent that is actually dominating and affecting your worship now. And you say, oh no, it's only these songs that make me know and experience and feel the presence of God. It's only these Bible passages that make me know and feel and experience the presence of God. Or it's only this type of church. Or, when I was in that church, I really met with the Lord, and now I'm in a different type of church, in a different place, and it's just not the same. I've got to get back to that, No, that is the sort of things Paul's talking about.
I think I used to experience that with my youth camps, where I'd go to camp and have this buzz, and it really grew in my relationship with Jesus. But then you get home and church wasn't quite the same, and I was like, I just want to go back there because that's where I really grow as a Christian. But that's a danger, isn't it, as Christians, that we get
stuck in the race.
We do, yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to move any further forward from 1987. That's it. You're like, okay, 40 years ago, and stuck in the past. So that is a real danger. Or we get paralyzed by the past. This happened to me years ago. And I gave the example of a friend of mine, and who doesn't feel able to lead Bible studies in his church, even though he's very gifted, because he feels a failure because of what's happened in the past. You know, we should be free from those things, but we can only be free from those things if we forget about them. If we keep our eyes firmly fixed forwards and focused on the goal. So that's some reflections. Did you say there's some more questions?
Well, they all cover. To be fair, they all cover quite similar ground to where we were, what we've been talking about. I guess one that maybe developed stuff a little bit is, you said to forget our past successes for God. Much of the Bible is taken up with encouraging us to remind ourselves of all God has done. How do these gel? I've been looking at the book of Joshua recently. They crossed the Jordan, and then they set up this big monument to remind themselves of what God has done. There seems to be an emphasis on reminding ourselves of the past in the Old Testament. The Lord's Supper isn't just a reminder, but one thing we do is remind ourselves of the Lord's death and resurrection. How does that all chime together?
Yes, that is brilliant. Yes, we must remember the past in that respect. Psalm 95 says exactly that. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as they did in the past. You know, and so, yes, but what do you need to remember from the past? It's not God's... the thing you should not be controlled by is your personal, subjective experience of God's work, but the objective reality and facts of God's work. In other words, what should we remember at the Lord's Supper, which is a wonderful example of this? What do we remember? We don't remember, God worked in my heart 30 years ago to bring me to a knowledge of Christ, and God has done this in my life and this in my life. No. At the Lord's Supper, you remember the Last Supper 2,000 years ago and what Jesus has done on the cross. That's what we need to remember. That's what we need to keep setting before us. And same, that's what Joshua's all about. Now, is there a connection between our subjective experience and the objective reality? Yes, there is some, but it's not that subjective experience that we need to be focusing on and relying on. It's Christ. It's his death and resurrection.
And I guess the Lord's Supper is all about proclaiming his death until he comes again.
Yes.
So we're doing we're looking back to help us to continue forwards and to strain to the goal, which is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't mention the Lord's Supper at all, but actually the Lord's Supper would have fit really well in this passage, and it would have fitted really well after this sermon, because it is about pressing on and striving to the goal, and remembering what Christ has done, but fixing your eyes on the future. It's a wonderful picture. So, yes.
Yeah, that's helpful. Anything else you want to talk about, or we can go straight on to this time tomorrow?
Yeah, so but I do, just going back to that, it's about being controlled by it. So, I did say, I think we said in a podcast a while ago, and this is always the case in the Christian life. You want to say things that are true without overstating stuff. So, the thing about forgetting is don't be controlled by the past. But you need to learn from your failures, and there are experiences that we have as Christians, places where we've met with the Lord, which means something to us, and that's a good thing. But let's not be controlled by it. So St Andrews for me was a significant time, because that's when I became a Christian. That's when I grew a lot as a Christian, and occasionally. I go back there. I haven't been back to the Lord's, but occasionally I go back there and I walk down the streets, and I stand in certain places and I go, I remember this. I remember what the Lord did, and that's wonderful, and thank God for it. But I'm not living my life going, I wish I lived in St Andrews. Yeah. I wish I lived 30 years ago. I wish it was like this. No. Move on. Move forward.
What would you say to anyone who feels like they have wobbled and fallen off track?
get back on the wagon. And let's be honest. Martin Luther talked about this, didn't he? About a drunk German peasant who is riding on a donkey, and he falls off on one side, he gets back up, and then falls off on another side and gets back up, and and in some sense we're all drunk German peasants as Christians, and we're always falling off the wagon to one side or to the other, either becoming a bit too strict and legalistic and self-righteous, or becoming a bit too liberal and loose and progressive, and you got to keep going back on. Or in terms of running the race, you stagger to one side, you stagger to the other, you stumble to one side. Yeah, we all do. Get back up and keep going. Press on. That's what Paul says. Press on to win the prize.
This time tomorrow?
Onwards. Run. Press on. Don't give up. Keep going. And encourage other people to do the same. We need each other to do that.
I have a guy who used to lead some youth work I was involved in. Every time he messages me or emails me, he just always signs it off with press on.
Wonderful.
It's a good thing to remember, isn't it? Press on. Keep going. Keep trusting in Christ. But press on towards the goal. Press on towards Jesus, knowing Jesus Christ.
Wonderful.
And being with Jesus Christ. Thank you, John P. Thank you for your preaching. Thank you for your thoughts. Thanks, everyone, for your questions and interacting with the podcast. Keep sending them in. Slido.com, #St. Clements. We'll try and record some stuff over the summer, but we're both away for a couple of weeks coming up, so there might not be a few episodes for a while, but do keep questions coming in, and we'll answer them whenever we get back to the next episode. Slido.com, #St. Clements. Catch up with sermon series on the church website or our YouTube channel, but most of all, we'd love to see you on a Sunday morning at 10:30 or Sunday evening at 6:30, but wherever we see you, we'll catch you soon. Goodbye.
God bless.